everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Vouri. I have an unhealthy amount of joggers, but Vouri's performance joggers, they take the cake as the softest, most comfortable pants that I can work out in, lounge in, or honestly, even go out in public in. Make sure to check out our description below for 20% off of your first purchase. On today's show, we have Brian Friend and Justin LoFranco here to discuss how at least a dozen athletes have tested positive for banned substances this season. And we're even hearing of possibly more to come in both the team and individual divisions. First, let's start with rookie Phil Toon. He qualified by finishing second at Granite Games and announced on his Instagram story today that he received an email from CrossFit notifying him that he tested positive for 3 banned substances. Justin, what can you tell us about his positive tests?
Well, unfortunately, what it's going to mean is, and we're still piecing some of this information together because it came to us just today and through Toon's own Instagram post. So we're lacking a little bit more information. Essentially, these 3 substances are going to take him out of the CrossFit Games and probably going to issue him a 4-year ban. The way this usually works is it's going to go on to, he's going to appeal. And actually, I'm not sure if he's going to appeal because he's kind of admitted to taking, finasteride, I think is what it's called. That may be its pharmaceutical name. But essentially, it's a prescription medication that, according to his coach in the post that his coach had made on Instagram, said that he admitted to taking it. He didn't do his due diligence. He didn't do any research as to what was actually involved in this drug, which is now resulting in his ultimately going to be a 4-year ban. It doesn't sound like he's going to appeal at this stage because he is admitted to using it, and so that doesn't stand to reason at this stage. But so he'll be issued a 4-year ban, and the next in line's I don't know if we've confirmed an invite at this stage of the game, but that's most likely what's going to happen now. And so he's going to now be the second individual athlete of the season so far to get issued a drug sanction.
Yeah, and speaking of being that second individual, Brian, just last week we did a segment discussing the banned substances from Nicholas Joyel after he came forward. Toon, he's an athlete that yourself, other analysts, a lot of people have been talking about very high, speaking of them this season. But based on his performance this year and what you've seen, were you surprised to see him come forward with these positive banned substance tests?
Well, I mean, you just kind of never know. I'm reminded of one of the CrossFit Games documentaries where Justin Berg addresses this question. And he's like, the eye test is not the only test, and that's why we do the test. And, Phil competed last year online at the Atleast Games and last chance qualifier. He didn't qualify through those events, so he probably wasn't drug tested. He competed at Wodapalooza. He placed in the top 10. I'm not sure which athletes there were drug tested. So this may be the first time that he's had a drug test in live competition. And so there's no real precedent for me to say whether this is something that's surprising or not. I think that the more surprising thing is just the quantity of failed drug tests that we've seen up to this point.
Right. And especially with that, again, just last week, we were talking about how a lot of teams were testing positive, which we'll get into in a second. But in the last week, this is the second individual athlete to test positive. What are both of your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, look, CrossFit has had a drug problem for a number of years. They've had consistently athletes who are rookies, especially, and I don't necessarily want to read into exactly why they're doing it, but trying to break into that, if I'm speculating here, trying to break into that upper rung, and sometimes the pressure of being in that next to qualifying position, but not quite making it over there, is causing people to make decisions that are ultimately getting them into trouble. I did a lot of research into drug testing years ago, pre-pandemic, when there wasn't nearly as much drug testing going on in the middle of the pandemic because live competition wasn't happening. But pre-pandemic, we haven't seen this much. This many positive tests coming out. Usually what you get are a lot of positive tests after the CrossFit Games. Not a lot, but more, because that involves the entire pool. And so you involve a lot of masters athletes that are in there, not necessarily that don't necessarily go through the same rigorous testing process that the individual games athletes are having. And I think this is a very unfortunate, very bad trend for CrossFit. It's also a very bad look for CrossFit. Now, I do have to say, and I think this is really important because this is a change of policy as we're seeing it from last year. And actually, we saw this issue happen last year where they were not testing the positions further on down the roster. Now, I have to give CrossFit a lot of credit that they are doing that now. Now, they're a little bit inconsistent in how that's applying across the board for all 10 semifinals, but they are, and what we're hearing is it's a much more common practice for them to be doing 6, 7, and 8 in order to stave off this issue. There were some of these issues last year when you had two teams testing positive from the same semifinal last season, and then it was called into question whether or not the athletes that were now getting invited were actually tested prior to going to the games. Now I think we have a lot more certainty that that's actually happening, and I think CrossFit deserves credit for doing that because, as we're going to get to here pretty soon, that turns out to be quite important in the process here, especially when it comes to the team division. So I think people need to understand that that's a newer practice, and it's actually very good, and it's clearly also showing some positive results that are further on down the roster that they may not have caught, which is also a very good, because what we do want and what athletes want is fair play across all divisions and in the sport.
Yeah, and actually, just now as we were recording, we're talking to somebody who works for us, Andy Gonzalez. She's watching Pedro Martinez Instagram Live, and he's actually just come forward to say that he's tested positive for a banned substance as well. He got his invite at Copa Sur. Any thoughts initially on this as we're having news come in as we're recording?
I think that, the main thing to keep in mind is that these are, this rolling information that's coming out. So we know that there's going to be delay, and it's not necessarily a guaranteed amount of time from when the semifinals drug tests were submitted, when CrossFit contacts those athletes, when the athletes choose to potentially alert their fan bases via Instagram or other social media. And then finally, when CrossFit wraps up the totality of the process that can potentially include appeals, and then they'll finally make their announcement. I think that CrossFit has already communicated they intend to make their announcement about all the drug sanctions when they have them all. And so, it's not, right now we're still in that kind of limbo period, and especially at this moment where things are happening very quickly. And I think there's been getting close to 8 or 9 in the last 36 hours alone between teams and individuals that, everyone's a little bit nervous right now.
Yeah, this is absolutely crazy. I don't think I have seen, outside of the CrossFit Games where they do a mass dump, in this stage of competition, in between semifinals with the final stage of qualifying competition and the CrossFit Games, I don't think I have ever seen this many positive results happen in this short a period of time. Now, tests are often done in batches. I've been to the testing facility, especially the one that's done here in the United States at UCLA. They do a lot of these in batches, so it's probably that they're getting a lot of these results and then communicating these results off. So it's not as if, it takes time to go through these tests. So, but that he is the second place athlete from Brazil. So I think that now that's going to become very interesting because we've got a lot more to talk about down what's going on in South America, right?
Sure. So let's get into that. So we have Pedro Martins, we have Nicholas Joel from last week, and then we have Phil Toon. When we look at the team side now, there's multiple positive drug tests from team athletes at the semifinal Copa Sur. The first place, the second place, and the fourth place finishing teams, they all popped hot. Now, what's interesting to me besides that is that the third place team, they say that they're not prepared for the games. Brian, what's going on in South America? Can you break this down in a way that ourselves and the viewers can really digest and understand what happened?
Yeah, so there's been no official communication from CrossFit about any of this, but from what we've been able to gather, there were 4 teams that were tested in South America following the conclusion of the event down there, the first through fourth place teams, which is in line with what I saw at semifinals that I went to, where in the beginning of the weekend, teams were briefed in North America and Europe that they'd test through 7, which is 2 spots outside of qualifying. 4 is 2 spots outside of qualifying in South America. And then all 4 of those teams have communicated via one form or another, sometimes their boxes or affiliates page, sometimes an individual athlete, and sometimes their team page has communicated that in 2 cases, it was specifically mentioned which athlete had failed the test. In one case, it was not, and just that they had someone on their team had failed. And in this case of the third place team that you're talking about, there's actually kind of an interesting anomaly here. If anyone goes to the CrossFit Games semifinal page for Copa Sur and sorts by the team division and clicks on that team, they'll see that next to their box that they're listed at CrossFit Barini, in parentheses is the word departed. So there's this bit of a dispute in general about if this is actually an affiliate in good standing, and they may just be choosing to omit themselves from the competition in general if they don't think potentially that they're in good standing anyway, so it would be kind of irrelevant.
So will any team from South America go?
Well, that's what's to be determined. So having said all of that, there's currently no teams that are eligible to compete at the CrossFit Games because you're supposed to have had to pass a drug test to collect prizes or advance. However, to what Justin was referring to from last year, where there was a case of teams not being tested at the semifinal and then potentially getting a backfill invite to the games, I think there was a protocol put in place for them to get tested at the games so that they still were tested at some point in competition. And there's the potential, based on some another incident that we wrote about on, I think, Sunday regarding Africa, that CrossFit could reach out and test the next team in line just kind of now. So we know that the second place team from Africa was contacted for drug testing on July 3rd, significant a few weeks after their semifinal ended, and potentially the same thing could happen with the teams in South America. The only problem with that is that third place team did cite that one of their complications was getting visas to get here and that they weren't planning to do that, so they weren't prepared. And if suddenly there's two more teams of 4 members plus maybe their coaches and whoever else that needs to make those travel arrangements, time's getting pretty tight.
Yeah, it's July 11th. I mean, the CrossFit Games are 3 weeks and change away. This is
hotels,
not a lot of time.
Flights,
hotels, flights, visas, especially in he references Africa, but also depending on what South American team ultimately gets an invitation. But coming from South America is no easy travel arrangement. Not impossible by any means. I mean, there's more than enough time to technically do it, but it is crunch time now, and now you're having an issue where this, just to put this into perspective, this is bizarre. 4 teams. One team is saying, hey, you know what, we're going to bow out. That's kind of strange to me. And the reasons, I mean, that's just my perspective, is that's kind of weird. The individuals that are competing for the CrossFit Games are competing with the intention of going to the CrossFit Games. If you don't accidentally show up and just get third. So, you have to have some idea that you're probably pretty decent. And, by my experience of talking with athletes, they're chomping at the bit with any opportunity to go and get to the CrossFit Games. So they've declined, or they've stated that they would decline if an invitation was sent to them. That's well and good. Still very weird. Now, the fact that the 4th place team also popped is even weirder, and it just speaks to a significantly big issue with drugs in South America. This is not saying anything bad necessarily about South America specifically. There's a different attitude about performance-enhancing drugs in South America. For example, you can at the local GNC equivalent, you can pick up drugs that would get you in trouble with USADA. Okay, you would not be able to pass a test with drugs that you can actually get in a regular store. So here in the United States, it's fairly atypical, and I don't I don't buy those products, so I can't say for certain that they're not in other regular stores, but it is a much more uncommon thing, and it's also just culturally way less acceptable in sports to be taking that here in the United States. Now, regardless, CrossFit has a zero tolerance policy. So if you test for anything, even if that's culturally acceptable or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But the fact that there are 3 teams and 1 team declining its invitation, which I've only heard of one instance where that's happened before, and that was Julian Alcaraz, who made that decision at the 2018 regional to decline his invitation because Miranda, his wife, was going to be having a baby. And he said, I cannot focus on being a father and going through this process with my partner and train for the CrossFit Games because I know what the demands are. And that was a really magnanimous decision that he made, and he did it publicly. He did it right there, and then they immediately invited the next guy. Well, okay, so one time that I can recall has the team ever done this. This is bizarre and it's very weird. But now CrossFit has to go and test number 5 and number 6. Also keep in mind that in order to make good on their own rule book for the season, which mandates that in order to advance and in order to collect prize money, you have to be tested. In Brazil, they send out prize money, what is it, Brian, to 5th place? Mm-hmm. 5th place, which means if 1 through 4 are declining or have an adverse test, that means they got to go to to 5, they got to go to 6, they got to go to 7, they got to go to 8, and they got to go to 9th place. So the 9th place team will now be receiving the 5th place payout, which means they got to test another 5 teams, and they have to hope that 2 of those teams, the top 2 in that section, don't pop hot. This is weird. They're going to have to expedite tests in order to ensure that they're actually tested before they arrive at the CrossFit Games. I don't know what to tell you here, guys,
but
but
like, point for them to test?
No, it's
like,
probably not. I mean, I've actually done. No, I've been to the observing. I observed a B sample test at the UCLA laboratory, and it takes about 6 to 7 hours to actually conduct a full test. And I was there present for the whole test, not allowed to leave. I followed the chemist around. So yeah, it can be done. I'm sure it costs a lot of money though. And it just is, it's wild. It's very unfortunate. It's very sad. This is really actually quite a bad day when it comes to reporting drug tests. And we don't really like doing this anyways, but this is a very unfortunate case, and they really need to get their stuff together down there because it's just a terrible look.
Okay, so moving now to another competition where we are seeing positive drug tests. Fittest in Cape Town, where Lisa Burns of Team CrossFit Commit Okavango, she tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs. There's a couple of things that I want to get into here. So first, Burns, she denies the sample belongs to her. And the sample had actually came back under SA Male Athlete 3, which Burns claims that she never signed off as when she was at the competition. And then the second part that I find notable is she alleged that several irregularities with CrossFit's testing process, including athletes being given beer and caffeinated beverages in the testing station during drug testing by CrossFit representatives. What is going on in this situation, Brian?
Yeah, she and her team have been pretty thorough in their communications with CrossFit and then also publicly in the last day or so. And they're basically suggesting that, as you say, the practices that were carried out surrounding the drug testing at the Fittest in Cape Town were unusual, to say the least. CrossFit has even acknowledged that. And then there's also another party involved, which is the people who administered those tests, the competition directors, whoever's involved in that process on site there. I'm not sure how much we've heard from those people yet, but these are anytime that there's a situation like this, the norm is to defend yourself. And the way that looks in terms of defending yourself or your teammate or whatever varies. She has, like I said, and her team have been pretty convincing, at least in certain regards, that some of those practices were strange, that the administration of the drug control forms was inconsistent, that the form that she was, supposedly had a positive sample on is listed as a male athlete, which is bizarre since she's a female. There's a lot of, things in there that are, from her perspective, that are kind of red flags or raise eyebrows about, what's going on. And additionally, like I mentioned earlier, no other teams were tested there. And all of the members of their team were tested, both of which are not practices that were consistent with the rest of the semifinals.
Justin, I think you've actually been in communication with Burns. Anything that you can bring us up to speed on with your conversation with her today?
Yeah, so over the last couple of days, she's exchanged a number of emails. I've read through the correspondence between her and CrossFit for the last couple of weeks as they've had a back and forth exchange. As she's tried to get more information as well as defend herself here. I'm gonna read from this. This is in her own words. Excuse me. I never signed for a form which referred to me as a male athlete, and that I signed for the alias known as SA Female Athlete 2. As I was the second female athlete to be tested. Now, I've talked to her. I also talked to Tion. I exchanged emails with him today. He's the event organizer for Fittest in Cape Town. And it was actually Tion who said that it was CrossFit who asked Drug Free Sport to test only one team and to test all 4 athletes of one team. CrossFit has a problem with inconsistency. Not necessarily the sport of CrossFit is challenging because of its inconsistency or not applying the same standards to each event, and we're seeing that here. So again, CrossFit's rulebook says you need to be tested in order to receive prize money or to move to the next stage. Well, they tested one team and one, and then tested 4 athletes, which again is fine. They can test 4 athletes or 2 athletes. I don't think anybody really cares. They just want to ensure fair play. But then they don't really do that in the other competitions. So they needed to test 2 and they needed to test 3 in order to write checks to those athletes because the whole podium was paid out. So why didn't they do that to begin with? Well, as I found out today from talking with Tion again, he stated that Drug Free Sport received an email directing them to test additional athletes, 1 male, 1 female, from additional teams approximately 1 hour after the final team workout. So what actually did Tion himself, he said, I personally went to get these athletes and escorted them to the controlled holding area. Well, after a deliberation between CrossFit's representatives, Tion and Drug Free Sport, they decided that they were not going to test them at that stage. So they actually sent them away. And the reasoning that they gave was that nobody had escorted them from the final workout and chaperone them, because they actually put somebody with, as I'm being told, with the athletes the whole time to ensure that they don't take anything or do anything or taint, that could cause a tainted supplement. They said, well, they've been gone for an hour, so we're just going to let them go. So they never actually tested them. And this was in consultation with the representative from CrossFit that was there in person. And so that's bizarre. But now they're testing her again. And I talked to Celeste Dutois, who was from the second place team. And she said and confirmed, I was tested on July 3rd. So now they're bringing everybody back. And then they're scheduling to test the rest of the athletes, all 4 of them, tomorrow or perhaps the next day. It was supposed to be today, but it looks like there was a scheduling issue with a drug-free sport agent. And so this is kind of a big giant cluster, which is, again, pointing to inconsistencies. Why is it done this way in one event, but not this way in another event? And then CrossFit's also involved in directing whether they're doing it at this event or another event. And I think as a fan, as an athlete, as any stakeholder involved in the sport, they just really have to put their hands up in the air and go, why? Why don't you just make a rule and stick to that rule? But the rule is in the rule book. It's very much in the rule book. But then they brought the people there, but then they didn't test them. So they sent them away, but then they're testing them again. Not really sure. It's really hard to follow this stuff. It's very unfortunate. And this is what makes this so bizarre and really hard and very convoluted.
Mm-hmm. Well, and CrossFit even admitted, they said that drug testing at the Fittest in Cape Town event was not indicative of how drug testing at CrossFit events is usually conducted. Brian, what do you think that this says about drug testing standards at semifinals as a whole when they're coming forward and saying that this is not how it normally is done?
I just think that CrossFit needs to take more ownership of the semifinal stage of competition. There's been multiple instances throughout semifinals and now at the conclusion of semifinals where they're pointing the finger at the organizing, group of people at one of these semifinal events and saying, that was not how we would have done it. This is not how we would have done it. That's not what we approved. This, if we had known about this, we would have done something differently. And it's like, no, you're the body of people that are organizing this, and there should be protocols in place, and then they should be carried out, and you have someone on site that's supposed to be doing that, and it should just be done. And if it's not done, then you should own it, because you're the one that's ultimately in charge of this competitive season. And that, to me, is the most sad thing, is that that's not happening, because mistakes happen. People make mistakes all the time, and all you can really do is say, I'm sorry for that. I didn't mean to do it. But that's not the case. Instead, they're just putting it off on the event directors, who are already feeling a huge burden in a lot of different regards in terms of running these events, and to not have the support of the governing body is probably pretty disheartening.
So again, same question that I asked about South America. Are we going to see representation from Africa at the CrossFit Games?
I think there's a much higher chance that we'll see a representative from Africa at least approved to go. But Justin was talking about how difficult it is to make a trip from Argentina or Brazil up here.
Right.
Like, you're talking about from Africa, that's a massive travel day, a huge expense. And most of these teams that are, teams especially that are coming to the CrossFit Games to compete from, far away, they spend a decent amount of money as soon as they find out that they've made it, raising money, or a decent amount of time raising money to try to make that trip possible. So they might get an invitation, they might pass their drug test, and they still might not come because it just might not make any sense logistically.
Yeah, Celeste Dutois, who was from the second place team, Tiger Valley CrossFit, CrossFit Tiger Valley unit, had said, "Yeah, we haven't, but we're very anxious. We, have a lot to do in order to try to do this." And they're I think she was expressing excitement, expressing the hope that everything would go well and that they would get the green light. But yeah, it's a long ways to travel, and there's really not a lot of time. And again, if you're dealing with visas, expedite visas are expensive, and they sometimes are very challenging to actually get an appointment. Not every country out there has a dozen consulates to be able to go visit and to get an in-person interview. And each country has different restrictions and needs. It's not as we look at it from our perspective. We're like, oh yeah, it's not so bad. I mean, to get maybe an appointment or an interview at a consulate. Not every country has it the same way. Not every country is as easy as just filling out an application. Some people need interviews in order to do that and stuff. And I certainly hope that a team is represented there. I know that CrossFit wants to continue to foster more participation worldwide. In order to do that, they need teams, they need athletes, individuals competing at the top of the sport and getting them media recognition, getting the opportunity to play, and also to raise their level of play as well against the best in the world.
But they also need to have systems in place that make it feasible and possible for when drug failures happen, that there's a backup plan that makes sense. And the timeline is being drawn into question here.
Testing all the athletes,
the timeline when we... But when you're looking at like the timeline of the season from semifinals up until the games, especially at this point, I think we're around 15 positive drug tests between athletes and team athletes. We still don't have week 4 of semifinal testing results. What is the solution here so that it doesn't get so backed up this close to the games?
Well, I've talked about a lot of different thoughts that I have about ways to potentially restructure the season so that less of these problems can occur. But that's just something that needs to be tightened up in the offseason. It shouldn't take 40 days to finalize semifinal rosters after quarterfinals. And we need to have a more streamlined process, whether it's move semifinals up, condense them to fewer weeks so that they're done by June 1st or whatever. And then by July 1st, we should have, hopefully all the tests in, and then you can even have a week period. And then we'd be at today and we'd say, yep, everything's cut and dry and ready to go. And we got 3.5 weeks for everyone who just found out to get ready. That's still not great, but at least it's giving us an opportunity for success, even if things go as badly as they have today.
Is this the most positive drug test we've seen during a season?
At this stage of competition, I think it is. Brian, you may know better, but it's been a while since we've had this many, and partially because of COVID, because that disrupted a lot of the testing protocols because there was no there's no live competition happening. When the CrossFit Games season ends, though, that number may be higher than where we're at right now because, again, you get a lot of testing for the masters athletes, and that is a big pool of people, especially when they used to have 20 athletes competing in each division, men and women. So there was actually quite a large pool of people that were getting tested at the CrossFit Games, and so that I can't say for certainty, but in this stage of competition, I believe it is.
Okay, what's your bottom line? Brian, you can start.
I mean, I would say that the bottom line here is this is just a sad day and a sad situation. It's just another mark along the way this season that's detracting from what we really want to be investing time talking about, which is the athletes, the competitions, the performances, and it's just disheartening that, it's sport, it's competitive. There's money on the line. Like, it's not surprising that there's going to be drug failures like this, but the amount of inconsistencies that are, bubbling to the surface as a result of these drug failures is for me almost more concerning than the fact that they're happening.
What's your bottom line, Justin?
Before I do the bottom line, I'm going to tell you I'm going to answer one question that you asked, Brian, because I think it's very interesting. I'm just going to throw this one out there. This is this purely hypothetical moment here in time. So if anybody out there is listening and the power to do this is my, give me credit for this one later on. I think that in order to stave off this issue, there should be fines. I think it should be fines if you fail a drug test. I don't think you should just get a sanction. I think you should get slapped with a $10,000 fine. I know that may sound ridiculous and crazy, but in real sports, there's fines. There are fines in the NBA. There's fines in the NFL. There's fines if you have unsportsmanlike contact. There are fines. I know these guys don't make a ton of money, but if you're going to cheat, you're going to get fined and you're going to get kicked out. I think that would be one way of doing it. I'm not saying it would work. I'm just saying that we've been trying it this way for a very long time. We've been having drug testing in different stages of competition for a very long time. We still have a lot of drug offenders. Okay, maybe try something new. I mean, it doesn't technically cost CrossFit any money to find somebody. It actually, maybe it could go into the pockets of the organizer. Maybe it could go for paying for more drug tests. I don't know. If you want to get back into the sport, you got to pay your fine. So if you want to wait 4 years and no pay your fine, well, pay your $5,000 fine, and I guess you could, sign up for the Open. I'm just saying, maybe it's stupid. I don't know. Other sports seem to do it though, and I know that if I was slapped with a $5,000 bill, maybe I wouldn't do it. But hey, that's just me. So my bottom line is inconsistencies, just like Brian said. I think that's really dragging down on the sport right now is inconsistencies. We've seen it in the Open. We saw it in quarterfinals. In semifinals, we saw it with, who's to blame for the rope length and why couldn't it be cut? And who's to blame for the height of the pull-up bar? And how come it couldn't be raised up? And now we have inconsistency with how drug testing is done. And I think that fans are just tired of nobody taking responsibility of things. And I think that you just have to be a leader, to present leadership. You have to stand up and say, you know what, guys, we're going to fix this. And we're not just going to fix it and say we're going to fix it. Here's how I'm going to fix it. And every time that there's an issue, and knowing that fixing things is a process, right? It is a process, and this is a big sport, so it's going to take some time. But I think that you can effectively communicate that, and I wish that they would do that, and I think the fans would do that. And honestly, it wouldn't hurt anything to say it. It wouldn't hurt anybody to just go out there and say, you know what, guys, we're going to fix this problem on day one. This is what we're doing. And I'm going to show up every day, and I'm going to have somebody here, and we're going to communicate that. And we're going to continue to commit ourselves to doing that. If we could fix those issues, I think people would be very happy. I think everybody is just frankly tired of inconsistencies and passing the buck on to somebody else. And I think people just want somebody at HQ to stand up and say, I got this one, and to actually do it. And my bottom line is, be responsible, be a leader, and that just takes ownership, and that takes having a face and a name and going out there and talking. And they don't do that very well. They never have, but they paid a lot of lip service to say we're going to communicate better. I'm still waiting to see it. We're still digging this stuff out of the trash practically and reading email correspondences because they just can't. They just cannot, and they refuse to go into detail about anything. And I think it's really wearing people down right now.
It certainly is not the topics we want to be talking about this close to the games, but Justin, Brian, thank you guys for breaking this down with us. Hopefully this shed a little bit of light for our viewers and gave them some perspective of everything that's going on. We'll see you guys next time.